There are places in this world where the rules of nature seem to bend. Places where the line between myth and reality blurs so completely that even the most skeptical mind begins to question everything it thought it knew. Blue Creek Mountain in the Texas Hill Country is one of those places, and what lives there has been watching us far longer than we've been watching it. Picture this. A rancher walks out to check his herd on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The sun is just breaking over the limestone hills. Birds are singing. Everything seems normal until he finds his prize bull, a 800-pound animal worth more than most people's cars, lying in a pool of blood. But this isn't a normal predator kill. The bull has been opened from throat to belly with surgical precision. Its heart is missing, completely removed, and circling the carcass are footprints that will haunt that rancher for the rest of his life. Some prints show 5 toes and a deep heel strike, the unmistakable pattern of something walking upright like you or me. Others reveal splayed digits and palm pads, the signature of a creature moving on all fours like a wolf or a bear. But here's what makes your skin crawl. They're from the same creature. The same thing that killed that bull can walk like a man and run like a beast. Robert Hensley had lived on his land at the base of Blue Creek Mountain for 23 years. He'd seen mountain lions take down deer. He'd watched coyotes work in packs. He'd even witnessed a black bear raid his garbage. But standing there, staring at those tracks, Hensley knew with absolute certainty that whatever made them was unlike anything in the natural world. And the most terrifying part, the tracks seemed deliberate, almost arranged, as if whatever killed his bull wanted him to find them, as if it was sending a message. The Texas Hill Country isn't your typical landscape, spanning 25 counties across the heart of central Texas. It's a wild, unforgiving terrain of jagged limestone hills, hidden underground rivers, and cave systems that tunnel deep into the earth like veins through stone. This is old land, land that remembers. Blue Creek Mountain rises near the small town of Wimberley, about 45 minutes southwest of Austin. On a map, it doesn't look like much, barely 400 feet at its highest point. But maps don't capture the feeling you get when you stand at its base and look up at those dense, shadowy forests of cedar and oak. Maps don't show you the caves that honeycomb the mountain's interior. Some explored, most not. And maps certainly can't convey the weight of the stories that have accumulated around this place for centuries. The Tonkawa people, who lived in this region long before Europeans arrived, had a name for Blue Creek Mountain. They called it the Hill That Watches. Their oral histories, passed down through generations, speak of something that dwelled in those caves. They never named it directly. There's power in names, and some things are better left unspoken. Instead, they called it the Hungry Shadow, a being that was neither fully animal nor fully spirit, something caught between worlds. When Spanish missionaries and settlers pushed into Texas in the 1700s, they encountered these same stories, and they added their own. Historical records, still preserved in the archives of San Antonio, contain unsettling accounts that church officials at the time tried to explain away as superstition mixed with genuine concerns about wildlife. Father Miguel Hernandez, a Franciscan priest stationed near what is now Wimberley, kept a detailed journal of his experiences. In an entry dated March 17, 1743, he wrote about the disappearance of livestock from local ranchers. The cowboys told him that El Demonio was responsible, the demon. But what caught Father Hernandez's attention was the consistency of their descriptions. They said it walked upright like a man, but was covered in dark fur. It made sounds that seemed almost human, but twisted somehow, wrong in a way they couldn't articulate. Father Hernandez himself claimed to have seen something during evening prayers. He described watching glowing eyes observing the congregation from the tree line, eyes positioned far too high to belong to any wolf or wildcat. When he and several men approached with torches, they found massive footprints pressed deep into the mud, footprints that showed both human and animal characteristics. The Spanish colonial authorities dismissed these accounts as hysteria, fueled by the isolation and dangers of frontier life. Mountain lions and black bears, they insisted, nothing more. But the reports continued, and they followed a pattern. When German immigrants began arriving in the Texas Hill Country during the 1840s, seeking the same kind of freedom and opportunity that had drawn earlier settlers, they brought with them their own folklore about creatures that lived in deep forests. Stories of the Waldgeist, forest spirits, and other things that lurked in the old woods of Bavaria and the Black Forest. They thought they were leaving those old superstitions behind. They were wrong. The Kruger family established a farm near the base of Blue Creek Mountain in 1847. They were industrious people, accustomed to hard work and harsh conditions. But in 1850, after only 3 years, they abandoned their land and moved to New Braunfels, a growing German settlement 30 miles to the south. They never returned to the property. Family letters, preserved by descendants who still live in the area today, reveal why they left. Their cattle, normally calm and easy to manage, became increasingly agitated. The animals would refuse to graze on the mountain slopes, even when grass was scarce elsewhere. Their dogs, strong, fearless animals bred for protection, would tremble and whine whenever the wind blew down from Blue Creek Mountain. They would pace the perimeter of the homestead at night, hackles raised, staring into the darkness. But it was the tracks that finally convinced the Krugers to leave. Enormous footprints would appear around their barn and near their well. Sometimes they showed 5 toes arranged almost like fingers. Other times they revealed claws and pads. The tracks were too large to be human, but too human-like to be any animal they recognized. One letter, written by Friedrich Kruger to his brother in New Braunfels, describes finding a deer carcass arranged in a way that seemed intentional. The bones had been separated and laid out in patterns. The skull was placed on top of a flat stone, almost like an offering or a warning. "This is not the work of wolves," Friedrich wrote. "This is something that I think about, something that wants us to know it is here." The Krugers weren't the only ones. Throughout the 1800s, a pattern emerged. Families would settle near Blue Creek Mountain, drawn by good water sources and fertile valleys. Within a few years, they would move elsewhere. The reasons varied, but certain themes repeated. Unexplained livestock deaths, strange sounds at night, an overwhelming sense of being watched. Fast forward to 1953. The post-war boom is in full swing. America is entering the modern age. Science and rationality are pushing back the shadows of superstition, or so everyone thought. Harold Timmons was a geologist with the Texas Bureau of Economic Geology, conducting a hydrological survey of the hill country. His work involved mapping underground water formations and cave systems, crucial information for a region dependent on aquifers and natural springs. Timmons was a scientist, a man of facts and measurements. He didn't believe in ghost stories or frontier legends. That changed during 3 days in October 1953. Timmons had identified a series of cave openings on the eastern face of Blue Creek Mountain. These weren't small fissures or animal dens. These were substantial openings leading to what appeared to be an extensive underground system. His job was to document them, take measurements, and collect rock samples. Describe the caves in clinical detail. Limestone formations indicating water erosion over millennia, stable ceiling structures, evidence of seasonal flooding. But there were anomalies, scratch marks on the cave walls that were too regular to be natural weathering, but too rough and deep to be Native American petroglyphs. They looked almost like tally marks, like something was counting or recording. Deeper in the caves, Timmons found bones, lots of them, deer vertebrae, rabbit skulls, the skeletal remains of raccoons and possums. This wasn't unusual. Caves often become depositories for animal remains, but Timmons also found cattle bones. Specifically, he found the skulls and long bones of at least 3 cows, judging by the size and shape. How had cattle bones ended up deep inside a cave system with an entrance too narrow and steep for livestock to navigate? Someone or something had carried them there. Timmons spent 2 days exploring and documenting the caves. On his 3rd night, camped near the main entrance to continue work the following morning, something happened that he never officially reported. Not to his supervisors, not to his colleagues. The incident only came to light 38 years later, when Timmons died in 1991, and his personal journals were donated to the university by his daughter. The entry for October 19, 1953, reads, "Woke approximately 2:30 a.m. to the sound of breathing. Not wind through cave openings, I have heard that sound many times. This was deliberate respiration, deep, steady, close. Grabbed flashlight and carbide lantern. When I illuminated the cave entrance, I saw something moving back into the darkness. It was on all 4s, but did not move like any bear I have observed. The locomotion was wrong, too fluid, too purposeful. The size was considerable. I would estimate at least 6 feet at the shoulder. It withdrew into the cave system when exposed to light. Did not see the creature again. Broke camp at first light and descended the mountain. Will recommend that the cave system be marked as unstable and unsuitable for further exploration." Timmons never returned to Blue Creek Mountain. When colleagues asked him about the caves, he cited structural concerns and moved on to other projects. But his daughter later revealed that her father had nightmares about those caves for years afterward. He would wake up gasping, saying something was watching him from the darkness, something that knew he was there. 15 years passed. Blue Creek Mountain remained largely undisturbed. Then came the summer of 1968, a summer that locals still refer to as the Summer of the Beast. Between June and September, 11 different ranchers in the Blue Creek Mountain area reported livestock deaths that defied explanation. This wasn't your standard predation. Dr. James Colby, the local veterinarian who examined many of the carcasses, said it looked almost surgical in its precision. The pattern was consistent and deeply disturbing. Specific organs were removed: liver, heart, kidneys, with what appeared to be deliberate cuts. The rest of the animal was left largely intact. There was minimal consumption of meat, which ruled out scavengers or typical predator behavior. Mountain lions kill for food. They eat. Coyotes tear and scatter. Bears are messy, destructive feeders. This was something else entirely. Dr. Colby, now deceased but whose records were preserved by his practice, noted something else unusual. The claw marks. On several carcasses, he found evidence of what he called prehensile trauma, marks suggesting that whatever killed these animals had opposable thumbs or thumb-like digits capable of gripping and manipulating. The ranching community was on edge. Guns came out. Patrols were organized. Men who had lived their entire lives in these hills and feared nothing suddenly found themselves checking over their shoulders when the sun went down. Then came the encounter that would become legendary among locals. 3 teenagers, Michael Reeves, Tommy Vasquez and Brian Porter, decided to spend a Friday night camping on Blue Creek Mountain. It was July 12, 1968. They were young, brave in the way that teenagers are, and completely unprepared for what they would experience. Michael Reeves, now 73 years old and living in a quiet suburb of Austin, rarely talks about that night. It took him decades of therapy to process what happened, but in a rare interview conducted in 2019, he finally agreed to tell the full story. The evening started normally. The 3 boys drove up an abandoned logging road on the north side of the mountain, about 3 miles from the nearest ranch house. They wanted to escape the oppressive Texas heat, the monotony of their summer jobs, and the watchful eyes of their parents. They set up camp near a creek, cooked hot dogs over an open fire, told ghost stories, and drank beer that Tommy had stolen from his older brother's stash. As darkness fell, they heard movement in the brush. At first, they assumed it was a deer. White-tailed deer were common in the area, and it wasn't unusual to see them at dusk. But the sounds didn't follow a normal pattern. Whatever was out there wasn't just passing through. It was circling their camp, stopping periodically, observing. Then the forest went silent. Anyone who has spent time in the wilderness knows that silence. It's the absence of crickets, tree frogs, owls, all the nocturnal creatures that fill the night with their chorus. When that sound stops, it means something is wrong. It means something large and dangerous has entered the territory, and every other living thing is hiding. Tommy grabbed a flashlight and swept it across the tree line. That's when they saw the eyes. 2 points of light, reflecting orange-red in the beam, positioned about 7 or 8 feet off the ground. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move. They just stared back with an intensity that felt intelligent. Brian wanted to throw rocks at it, thinking maybe a bear had climbed a tree, but Reeves stopped him. Later, he would describe a gut instinct, a primal understanding that whatever those eyes belonged to wasn't just looking at them. It was studying them, evaluating them. Then the wind shifted, and they smelled it. Reeves struggled to describe the odor even 50 years later. It was like a wet dog, but worse, he said, mixed with sulfur like rotten eggs and something else I can only call wrong, like the smell of disease, of something that shouldn't be alive but is. It was so strong that Tommy actually vomited. The creature made a sound then, a low rumble that seemed to resonate in their chests, rising in pitch until it became something almost like laughter. Not human laughter, too deep, too resonant, but close enough to trigger every evolutionary alarm in their brains, screaming danger, danger, danger. They ran. No discussion, no debate, pure panic. They left everything, tent, sleeping bags, food, flashlights, and sprinted through the darkness toward Tommy's truck. Reeves said he could hear it behind them, not running but walking, following at a leisurely pace, as if it knew they couldn't escape if it really wanted to catch them. They drove down that mountain at speeds that should have killed them, taking hairpin turns far too fast, the truck's tires squealing, loose gravel spraying. They didn't stop until they reached the Whataburger parking lot in San Marcos, where they sat shaking and crying until the sun came up. When they finally returned the next afternoon, accompanied by Reeves's father and uncle, both armed with rifles, what they found convinced even the skeptical adults that something terrible had happened on that mountain. The campsite looked like a war zone. Their tent wasn't just torn, It was shredded into ribbons, the fabric hanging from trees like tattered flags. The heavy Coleman cooler, solid metal construction, the kind designed to withstand rough use, had 4 deep gouges in the lid. The scratches went completely through the metal and the insulation beneath. Reeves's father, a Vietnam veteran who had seen the worst that humans could do to each other, went pale when he saw those marks. He made the boys promise right there that they would never camp on Blue Creek Mountain again. It was a promise they kept. Something walks the ridges of Blue Creek Mountain. Something that has been there longer than our towns, longer than our fences and roads, longer than our certainty that we understand the natural world. The teenagers who fled that night learned a truth that the Tonkawa people knew centuries ago. Some places belong to the wild, and some things in the wild are watching us back. But the story doesn't end with 3 terrified teenagers. It's only the beginning, because 5 years later, something would happen that would force law enforcement, scientists, and even government agencies to take the Blue Creek Mountain mystery seriously. 5 years after 3 teenagers fled Blue Creek Mountain in terror, something happened that law enforcement could no longer ignore. The year was 1973, and Robert Hensley, the same rancher whose mutilated bull we talked about at the beginning, was about to have an encounter that would change everything. But Hensley's case wasn't just about 1 dead bull. It was about 17 dead goats, arranged in a circle like some kind of ritual, each one killed with the same surgical precision that had been reported for decades. And this time, there was a witness, sort of. Sheriff Raymond Foster had been born and raised in these hills. He'd heard the Blue Creek Mountain stories since childhood, told around campfires, whispered in bars, dismissed by daylight, but remembered after dark. But Foster was a lawman. He dealt in facts, evidence, and prosecutable crimes. Ghost stories weren't his jurisdiction. Until he stood in Robert Hensley's pasture on that August morning in 1973 and realized that whatever had killed those goats wasn't in any textbook he'd ever read. The goats hadn't been dragged away and partially consumed the way coyotes would feed. They hadn't been cached in trees the way mountain lions store their kills. They were arranged, placed deliberately in a rough circle, each one missing the same internal organs: liver, heart, kidneys, removed with cuts so clean they looked like they'd been made with surgical instruments. Foster called in Dr. Patricia Norwood from Texas Parks and Wildlife. Dr. Norwood was a wildlife biologist with 15 years of experience investigating predator activity. She'd examined hundreds of kill sites. She knew mountain lion behavior, bear patterns, coyote pack tactics. She was the expert Texas authorities called when they needed definitive answers about wildlife incidents. She couldn't explain what she found at the Hensley Ranch. Her official report, filed with Texas Parks and Wildlife and available through public records requests, concluded that the deaths were consistent with large predator activity, most likely mountain lion. Safe, professional, unremarkable, but her personal notes, discovered in her files after her death in 2018, tell a completely different story. The footprints were the problem. Dr. Norwood found tracks showing bipedal locomotion, something walking upright on 2 legs with a stride length exceeding 4 feet. Whatever made those prints was tall and heavy. She also found quadrupedal tracks, but the gait pattern was wrong. The front paws showed characteristics she'd only seen in primates, elongated digits with a thumb-like opposition. The tracks didn't match any known North American animal. Most disturbing, both sets of tracks, bipedal and quadrupedal, showed identical wear patterns and depth of impression. They were from the same creature, something that could walk upright like a human, and drop to all fours like an ape. Dr. Norwood spent 3 nights at the Hensley Ranch, sleeping in her truck, hoping to observe whatever was responsible. On her second night there, she woke to the sound of breathing outside her vehicle. Heavy, rhythmic, close. When she turned on her flashlight, illuminating the window beside her, she saw a handprint on the glass. Not a paw print, a handprint, with 5 distinct fingers, elongated and powerful, and what appeared to be a 6th digit, possibly a partially opposable outer finger. The print was massive, 17 inches from wrist to fingertip, and it was fresh. Condensation from breath still fogged the window beneath it. Dr. Norwood grabbed her camera, but whatever made the print had already disappeared into the darkness. She photographed the print anyway. She measured it. She documented it. And then she never included any of it in her official report. Years later, in a journal entry written shortly before her death, she explained why. "I couldn't risk my career on something so impossible. I convinced myself I'd misidentified what I'd seen, but I knew the truth. I've known it for 45 years. Something lives on that mountain, something we don't have a name for." The Hensley case attracted the attention of Dr. Marcus Webb, a cryptozoologist from Houston who had been documenting reports of unusual creatures throughout Texas since the early 1960s. Webb arrived in September 1973 with a simple goal: conduct the most comprehensive investigation of Blue Creek Mountain ever attempted. Over 3 months, Webb interviewed 43 witnesses whose encounters spanned 5 decades. The consistency of their descriptions was remarkable. Large size estimates ranged from 7 to 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown or black hair, capable of both bipedal and quadrupedal movement, eyes that reflected light like an animal's, and sounds, strange vocalizations that seemed almost linguistic, as if the creature was trying to communicate but lacked the anatomy for human speech. Webb collected physical evidence. He made plaster casts of footprints showing what appeared to be a partially opposable big toe, similar to extinct hominid species but much larger. He gathered hair samples from fence posts and tree bark where witnesses reported sightings. The hair was sent to laboratories at UCLA for analysis. The results were puzzling. The hair showed medullary patterns, the internal structure of the hair shaft that didn't match any known animal. It had characteristics of both primate and canine hair, but aligned perfectly with neither. One researcher wrote in the margin of the analysis report, "Sample more closely resembles extinct megafauna than any modern species." During his investigation, Webb himself had 2 encounters with something he couldn't explain. The first occurred while exploring the cave system on Blue Creek Mountain's eastern face, the same caves Harold Timmons had investigated 20 years earlier. Webb heard movement deep in the passages and recorded vocalizations he couldn't identify. Low-frequency rumbles mixed with higher-pitched calls that seemed to echo from multiple directions, suggesting either multiple creatures or sophisticated use of the cave's acoustics. The second encounter was visual. From a concealed observation blind he'd constructed, Webb watched through binoculars as a large, dark figure moved through the forest with remarkable speed. It traversed terrain that would challenge even experienced hikers, fallen logs, loose rock, dense undergrowth, as easily as if walking on flat ground. The figure appeared hunched or crouched, but even in that posture, Webb estimated it stood at least 6 feet tall at the shoulder. "I've investigated reports of cryptids all over this country," Webb said in a later interview. "Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest, the skunk ape in Florida, the Fook monster in Arkansas. Blue Creek Mountain is different. The evidence here is more consistent, more compelling. Whatever is here has been here for a very long time, and it's real. March 17th, 1981. Ranch hand Luis Valdez was checking fence lines on the Garrett Ranch when his horse suddenly reared with such violence that Valdez was thrown to the ground. His horse, Cisco, a calm, reliable quarter horse he'd ridden for 6 years, bolted in terror. When Valdez regained his footing, he saw why. About 40 yards away, something was feeding on a dead calf. At first, he thought it was a black bear. Then it stood up, rose on 2 legs to its full height, and Valdez's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. It was at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark matted hair, arms that hung past its knees, and hands. Not paws, hands covered in blood. The creature saw him and made a sound Valdez would later describe as a growl with words trapped inside it. As if it was trying to speak, but its throat couldn't form the sounds. Valdez had a hunting rifle. He'd been shooting since he was a child. He was a good shot. At 40 yards with a stationary target, he couldn't miss. He fired 3 times. He swears he hit it at least twice. He saw the impacts, saw blood spray from its chest and shoulder. Any animal should have gone down. A man would have been dead. But the creature didn't fall. Instead, it screamed, a sound that was part human agony, part animal rage, and then it ran, not on all 4s like a wounded bear, on 2 legs, moving faster than any human could sprint, crashing through brush that should have slowed it down, moving with a speed and power that defied belief. Valdez ran too. He ran 4 miles back to the ranch house, not stopping, not looking back. Tom Garrett found him collapsed on the front porch, sobbing and praying in Spanish. A search party tracked the creature the next morning. They found blood, a lot of it, enough that whatever was bleeding should have died from blood loss alone. They followed the trail for almost a mile through terrain that would challenge experienced trackers, through thorn bushes that tore their clothes, over rocky outcrops that required climbing, through a cold, fast-moving creek. Then the trail simply ended. The blood was sent to a laboratory in Houston for analysis. The results came back inconclusive, mammalian blood, but the DNA couldn't be matched to any known species. The genetic markers showed similarities to both human and ursine DNA, but perfectly matched neither. Whatever Valdez shot that day survived multiple gunshot wounds, traveled at least a mile through difficult terrain while bleeding heavily, and then disappeared. It should have died. It didn't. Fast forward to 2001. The Texas Bigfoot Research Center launched the most technologically advanced investigation of Blue Creek Mountain ever conducted. Led by researcher William Danines, they brought over $50,000 worth of equipment. Thermal imaging cameras, audio recording equipment capable of capturing infrasound, DNA testing kits, motion sensors, night vision technology. They spent 6 months documenting anomalies. During their 3rd week, team member Sarah Cole was monitoring thermal cameras when she detected 3 large heat signatures moving through the forest. They were bipedal, walking upright, moving in apparent coordination. One was significantly larger than the other 2. It looked like a family, Cole said. The largest one kept stopping and seeming to point things out to the smaller ones, like a parent teaching children, like it was showing them something about their territory. The team recorded vocalizations that didn't match any known animals. Wood-knocking sounds in patterns of 3, long sustained howls lasting up to 40 seconds, and what sounded like conversations, different vocal tones calling and responding, as if communicating complex information. One recording captured what sounded unmistakably like laughter, deep, rumbling sounds rising and falling rhythmically, coming from at least two different sources responding to each other. DNA analysis of collected hair samples produced frustratingly ambiguous results. The samples were definitely mammalian, but too degraded for complete sequencing. What could be analyzed showed genetic markers similar to both human and unknown primate DNA, matching neither completely. Autumn 2003. Off-duty police officer David Mitchell was hiking on Blue Creek Mountain when he realized something was following him. Every time he stopped, it stopped. When he moved, it moved. He could see glimpses of something dark moving through the trees. Staying just out of clear sight, Mitchell, a trained observer with years of law enforcement experience, decided to confront whoever was following him. He called out, identifying himself as a police officer. What happened next changed his life. From about 50 yards away came a deep vocalization that he felt in his chest. Then he saw it, standing between two large oak trees, approximately 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, face that was almost human but profoundly wrong, heavy brow ridge, prominent jaw, features suggesting intelligence but not humanity. They looked at each other for several seconds. Then the creature simply turned and walked deeper into the forest. Didn't run, I walked, as if Mitchell posed no threat at all. I've confronted armed suspects, Mitchell said in his official report. I've been in dangerous situations. Nothing has ever affected me like looking into that thing's eyes. It was thinking, assessing me, like I was the animal and it was the person. Mitchell retired from law enforcement early and moved to Houston. He says he could never feel comfortable in those hills again, knowing what was out there. In 2018, geologists mapping aquifer systems beneath Blue Creek Mountain made an astonishing discovery. The cave system was far more extensive than anyone had realized. Chambers the size of football fields, passages extending miles into the earth, possibly connecting to other cave networks. Using remote cameras lowered through natural shafts, they photographed one chamber approximately 300 feet below the surface. The floor was covered with what appeared to be bedding, mounds of dried vegetation arranged in distinct areas. The walls showed those same mysterious scratch marks found in other locations, and there were bones. Piles of them, organized by type and size, most disturbing. Fresh footprints in the cave mud, prints matching casts made decades earlier. Proof that something was still using these chambers, still living beneath the mountain. When they attempted to explore deeper using drones, the equipment failed. 3 expensive drones sent into the tunnels never returned. The last images from one showed what might have been a hand reaching toward the camera before the signal cut out. Water samples from springs fed by the Blue Creek Mountain aquifer showed unusual biological markers, DNA fragments that didn't match any known species, high concentrations of pheromones suggesting a large primate marking territory. We've barely explored 1% of those caves, said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who led the geological survey. There could be an entire ecosystem down there that we know nothing about, and something is living in it. In 2021, Raymond Whitehawk, a 78-year-old Tonkawa elder, decided it was time to speak publicly about what his people had always known. According to Tonkawa oral history, the Shadow Walkers Hakani have lived in these hills since before human memory. They are neither animal nor human. Something else, something old. The Tonkawa learned long ago to respect them, to acknowledge their territory, and to maintain boundaries. White Hawk shared a story from the 1890s. During a violent storm, Tonkawa hunters sheltered near Blue Creek Mountain. That night, 3 of the creatures came to the edge of their camp. They didn't attack. They simply stood at the edge of the firelight and watched. One hunter attempted to communicate using hand gestures. The largest creature seemed to listen, then made its own gestures, pointing to the sky, to the mountain, to the ground. An attempt at communication about territory, about ancient claims to the land. The hunters left offerings before departing. Years later, one returned to find the tobacco pouch he'd left hanging from a tree branch 30 feet off the ground. A message, an acknowledgement. They've been watching us for thousands of years, White Hawk explained. Learning about us, understanding us better than we understand them. They're not evil. They're not monsters. They're beings with their own purpose. We've shared this land with them. Coexistence requires respect, requires boundaries. Problems happen when those boundaries are crossed. In 2020, during COVID-19 lockdowns, when fewer people were outdoors, sighting reports increased dramatically. The Martinez family's security cameras captured something spending 30 minutes on their property, examining their chicken coop block, picking tomatoes from their garden, even sitting on their porch swing. The footage shows a large bipedal figure moving with intelligence and curiosity, not threatening, just exploring. 7 other families reported similar experiences that month. Trail cameras captured images of upright figures investigating human structures. As if with fewer people around, the creatures felt safe enough to satisfy their curiosity about us. Dr. Michael Torres, a bioacoustics researcher, has been recording sounds in the Blue Creek Mountain area since 2019. In May 2021, he captured what sounded like multiple creatures engaged in what he described as a gathering or meeting. Different vocal tones, what might have been juveniles with higher-pitched calls. At one point, all the voices joined together in something like singing or chanting. 3 minutes of complex vocalization, unlike anything in nature. It shows sophisticated communication, Torres said. These aren't just animal calls. They're exchanging information, maybe even language. In 2023, a mysterious buyer purchased 3,000 acres of land that includes most of Blue Creek Mountain's northern face. The property is now surrounded by high fences and security cameras. Black SUVs patrol the perimeter. Helicopters fly overhead at night without lights. Locals speculate about what's being hidden or protected. As darkness falls on Blue Creek Mountain tonight, somewhere in those cedar-covered slopes and limestone caves, something moves with purpose through land. It has known far longer than any human settlement. Ranchers still lose livestock in ways that can't be explained. Hikers still report feeling watched. Trail cameras still capture glimpses of something that shouldn't exist. It stands at the boundary between the world we think we know and something far older. Something that has learned to live alongside us while remaining almost invisible. Almost. The beast of Blue Creek Mountain, whatever it is, remains out there, watching from the shadows, leaving its tracks in remote places. And sometimes when the moon is right and the wind carries sound across those ancient hills, you can hear it calling, calling to others of its kind, calling across a territory it has held for thousands of years. The Tonkawa were right. Some places are watched. Some territories belong to beings we don't fully understand. And maybe, just maybe, that's how it should be. Maybe not everything needs to be captured, catalogued and explained. Maybe some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. But here's what we know for certain. Something lives in those hills. Something real. Something that has survived and adapted while humans built towns and roads and convinced ourselves we'd conquered the wilderness. We haven't conquered anything. We've just been allowed to stay. And as long as we respect the boundaries, as long as we remember that we're not the only intelligent things walking this earth, maybe that arrangement can continue. But cross those boundaries, venture too deep into territory that isn't yours, then you might find yourself face to face with something that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the natural world. You might find yourself staring into eyes that reflect your flashlight beam, eyes that hold intelligence, eyes that have been watching your species for millennia, eyes that belong to the beast of Blue Creek Mountain. And in that moment, you'll understand what Robert Hensley understood standing over his dead bull, what those 3 teenagers understood in 1968, what Luis Valdez understood when he pulled the trigger, what Officer David Mitchell understood during those 5 seconds of locked eye contact. You'll understand that you're not at the top of the food chain. You never were. You just didn't know what else was out there.